Hi, how are you doing? I hope you are good. Welcome to class. Now, this is SabiScholar learning platform, and I am Amara Chuku, your government tutor. I believe you've dealt with government as a subject in your senior secondary school, and you are very familiar with so many aspects of the subject. And for the purpose of this learning, we will start off with a basic concept of government. You will definitely come across these questions or these concepts as multiple questions or subjective in your exams. So listen attentively. Now let's start off with the first concept you should understand in government, and that is power. When you hear power, the very first thing that should come to your mind is the ability to make someone do your bid. Now simple, power is the potential, the ability to influence people's behavior, to make someone do what you want them to do, even when they don't want to do them. And funny enough, you must have exercised or even experienced one form of power or the other today, even with your siblings at work and all of that. That's what I'm talking about. Now let's even look at sources of power. It's more like how can I get power? How is power exercised? Number one is control of force. This type of power comes from the use of coercion, exactly. The use of threat, you see punishment, to get people to do something. So people get to fear you, hence they need to do your bid. If you are thinking of institutions like the military, the police force, the court under this, then you are absolutely right. You fear soldiers, hence you obey them. You fear jail term, and that's why you obey court orders. Now, the second source of power that I have here is wealth. Oh yes, wealth is power, my friend. Make money and you will see how many people will be willing to do your bid even without you asking. We have billionaires, we have business moguls under this category. The likes of Otedola, Dangote, and so many of them. So when you are wealthy, you can enter places, control people and make them do your bid. So yes, in all thy gettings, my friend, get money, make money. Wealth exactly is power. Away from wealth, we have the third source of power, which happens to be formal office or position. Now, this is basically an interesting aspect of power, which we get to see often, where people obey and do as you say because of the position you occupy. Now, this is where your GM belongs exactly, because he is your top boss, you get to obey him. It is more like wielding legitimate power from an office or formal position you occupy. Now, let's talk about power that comes as a result of your skills. Your skill exactly can give you power. Your expertise in a particular field can confer a certain level of power. And so you should basically have a skill so you can get this power. Like a medical doctor can tell you what to do and what not to do when it comes to your health. I, as your teacher, can tell you what to do and what not to do when it comes to government courses or subjects. And away from that, we have popular support as a means of getting power. Now, this is basically having people support you, rally around you, give you their mandate, give you their trust and all of that. These sort of persons, when you say something, they will be willing to do it. And that you having power over them. Now that we understand what power is all about, now let's talk about another interesting aspect or concept you should know in government, and that has to do with authority. You might have heard this or be asking yourself, is authority not the same as power? No, it is not the same. While they are being used interchangeably, I need you to know that authority and power are different. Authority is that legitimate ground, is that profound atmosphere you need, for power to be solidly exercised. Just put it very simple. It is the legal and formal right to give command and make decision. So when you think authority, ensure to think legitimate right. Decision making, think enforcement, exactly. Like President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, before he became the president, he was the governor, which also gave him authority. But before then, he had power basically from his wealth. But he needed that office, that legal office, that very formal office to solidify his power, especially in the political space. Hence, he vied for the office of the president. Now down to sources of authority or types of authority. Let's even look at how Max Weber was able to classify these types of authority. Max Weber, you should remember, or you should note that he is a German sociologist and a political economist. So he divided authority into three. Number one is legal rational authority. Now, this is basically the authority derived and made acceptable by law, rules, and regulation. Let me tell you that in this case, in this type of authority, it is not actually vested on the individual per se, but of course, it's vested in a position. So by the virtue of that office, the person is wielding or the person is occupying, which is guided by laws or set of rules, constitution, as the case may be. For instance, the political offices that we have, the seat of the president, office of the vice chancellor, and all of that. A classic example of this, especially in the movie, happens to be in Air Force One Down. If you've seen that movie, you will notice that the Secret Service in the White House kept making reference to a particular narrative which served the chair not the man. So that's very classic. The second aspect of authority is the traditional authority. Now, unlike the legal rational authority, the traditional authority is derived by customs, traditions, beliefs that has been in existence. And in this form of authority, it is vested on an individual, right, who inherited this very authority from their forefathers. And the throne there is basically for sacred reasons. So the main authority is vested on the individual. So it's usually based on inheritance. We have the likes of Emir of Kano, Obang of Calabar, Obi of Onisha, and King of this village and all of that. So that's for traditional authority. Away from traditional authority, the last one, according to Max Weber, we have charismatic authority. Now, this very form of authority is conferred on individuals with outstanding personalities, right, by their followers, of course, so who are often basically inspired or drawn to their personalities. Now, these set of followers adore these individuals, in such a way that they get to do their bid, anything they want, right? We have the likes of Odumegwu Ojukwu, we have the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, we have MKO Abiola. These individuals are even dead, yet their ethics are still living, and people are still following through their teachings. Away from all of this, I want you to get a clear understanding or clear distinction between power and authority. So let's look at the difference between power and authority so that when you see them in your exams, you won't be confused at all. When we talk authority, remember authority is legitimate and very authentic. Power is not always legitimate. It's not always legitimate. It's not always very, very authentic like that. So that's the difference. When we talk about authority, it comes with leadership positions. And you don't necessarily need to be in a leadership position to exercise power. You that's exercising power on your siblings and all of that, you don't have any leadership position, but you're exercising the power. Now, you can resist power and decide not to support it, but resisting an authority is very, very unlawful. By this, you cannot resist authority. Authority is formal and very valid, but power, it's not actually always valid. So these things are the clear distinctions between power and authority. Now that you've known and understood what power is, now that you've understood what authority is, and the fact that you needed to make your power super strong and solid, I need you to also understand the next concept we're moving into, which happens to be legitimacy. When you hear the word legit, what comes to mind? Authentic, right, acceptable. Exactly. So legitimacy is the rightfulness and acceptance of a government, an administration, or an era. Let me break it down. By this, I mean that for a government to be legitimate, the constitutional provisions, due processes must be followed. You have the power, yes. You have the authority, yes. Now, is this authority you wield right? Is it acceptable? How did it emerge? Did it follow due process? Now, this exactly is what legitimacy is all about. Let's look at some factors that are influencing legitimacy. Number one, we have periodic, free, and fair elections. Now, was the electoral process, which is the emergence process of that administration, transparent? Exactly. Was there any election? If we had elections and all of that, then we'll begin to think of legitimacy. The second one has to be non-interference when it comes to rights and dignity of individual citizens. Does the regime in question recognize and respect the right of the citizens? If yes, then we can say, okay, there's legitimacy. Okay. Now, to think legitimacy, you also need to factor in accountability, responsiveness. Can people hold the government accountable? A responsive and, of course, accountable government encourage legitimacy. So yes, when we have accountability, then you can begin to think, okay, this government is legitimate. Now, a government is legitimate when it can provide the basic needs of the people. Okay, so that exactly is also a factor when it comes to legitimacy. Now, legitimacy as a factor of political or government stability is very important that we look at it. So looking at it as a factor when it comes to maintaining political stability, you get to understand that when a government is accepted, when a government emerges following due processes, citizens will have no reason to react violently against it. Yes, there will be low level of unrest. So legitimacy of a government is the beginning of stability in the polity. Now, away from legitimacy, let's look at another interesting concept that you should know in government, and that is sovereignty. Sovereignty in its simplest form is the supreme ability or the power of a state to control its own people legally and otherwise, independently actually, while also being recognized by other countries as having this power. Now think of sovereignty to be like Nigeria's absolute power to, administratively, legally, economically provide and protect you and I as citizens of Nigeria and of course the entire territory, and have this same power recognized by other countries like Ghana, Ghana recognizing that, okay, Nigeria can protect its citizens. That's exactly what sovereignty is all about. Now, let's begin to talk about types of sovereignty. Now, we have internal sovereignty. Now, this simply means the supreme authority of a country recognized within the country by its citizens. It's just like we Nigerians recognizing that, okay, the president can take care of Nigerians administratively and otherwise, and that's internal sovereignty. Talking about the second one, external sovereignty. Now, this is like the opposite of internal sovereignty. It refers to the recognition of this supreme power of a country by other countries. For instance, Ghana acknowledging the president of Nigeria caters or controls Nigerians, of course, and the territory and takes care of Nigeria and otherwise. It's more like US recognizing and acknowledging that Ghana is a sovereign state. It controls its territory. Now, moving on from that to look at legal sovereignty. We're talking the law this time around. We're talking about the law-making body of a state. Now, here we're looking at the highest legal power, right, involving the lawmaking and, of course, law enforcement, right? Now, away from that legal sovereignty, we have the political sovereignty. Now, this is basically recognizing that the highest political powers, is resting on the electorate. You and I, we have the ultimate power because we get to elect who becomes our leader. Away from political sovereignty, we have the jury sovereignty. Now, this exactly is about the legal and constitutional recognition of supreme power of a state. Yes, it's in a document. Yes, it's in the constitution. That's when we call it the jury sovereignty. Now, the opposite of the jury sovereignty is de facto sovereignty, which is the next type of sovereignty, de facto sovereignty. This type of sovereignty asks the question of things on ground. We know that it's in the constitution, okay, but beyond the constitution, what are we seeing? What are the facts on ground? Are people actually, recognizing the supremacy of the federal government or the central power or the supreme power in the state? Can you look at the people and tell that, okay, this country is actually independently managed by a supreme power and they are doing well? That's exactly de facto sovereignty. Now, let's look at location of sovereignty exactly. Now, this exactly has been a serious bone of contention. Some scholars are believing that sovereignty is resting solely on electorate, right? That's exactly making reference to political sovereignty. But there are many people who believe that absolute power rests nowhere exactly, and that's because there is no absolute sovereignty. So this is basically because absolute sovereignty, right, is easier with unitary system of government. But we don't have so many countries that are fully practicing unitary system of government, and that will lead us to the limitations to sovereignty. Now that we've made it clear that there is no absolute sovereignty anywhere, now one of the limitations we're talking about is constitutional limitation. And this is because in some constitutions exactly have powers dissolved between the center and other units, like Nigeria exactly. We have a presidential type of government with a federal system structure. And that means that power doesn't rest solely in the center. Another limitation here is the fact that public opinion has altered a lot of government policies, and people can now vote in or out an authority they do not want. Away from that, we have multiple associations like churches, student union, we have trade unions, labor unions like that of Nigeria right now, forming strong voices against the supreme powers of the government. We also have countries who are dependent on each other for economic growth and security, and this exactly limits sovereignty. We also have a case where countries are belonging to different organizations, international organizations, who exactly have rules guiding them, and these rules are binding, to their member state. Like Nigeria belongs to OPEC or AU. So no matter how strong Nigeria is, we will have to bend because of OPEC's rules and all of that. Another one has to be the fact that international laws are also now subjecting states to a lot of restraint. There's so many things you can do and you'll be clamped down by international laws, hence limiting absolute sovereignty. Now, this is the much we'll be taking for today. I believe that you now have a full grasp of the concept of power, authority, legitimacy, and of course sovereignty, and you can answer any question from these concepts. So special thanks to you for staying put. I will see you again in the next class, where we will take a step further in the basic concept of government. Bye for now.